At its peak, Buda was the second largest engine supplier in America, powering more than 110 different truck manufacturers and nearly 30% of all trucks on the road. Their engines powered fire trucks, wartime machines, and the tractors that helped feed the country. They employed over 2,000 workers and supplied engines to many manufacturers across American industry. But, despite being an industrial titan that helped build modern America, the brand has since vanished into total obscurity. This is the rise and fall of Buda, how America's engine empire vanished. Buda began in 1881 in a small Illinois railroad town that gave the company its name. George Challenger founded it there as the Buda Foundry and Manufacturing Company, building equipment for the railroads. That was the business of the era. America was laying track faster than it could count the miles, and every mile needed tools, hardware, and parts. Buda made them all, but the town of Buda, Illinois was never going to be big enough for what Challenger had in mind. By the early 1890s, the company had relocated to Harvey, Illinois, just south of Chicago, where the rail connections were better. That move changed everything. Harvey was not just a better address. It put Buda inside the orbit of one of the most industrially dense regions in the country. Chicago and its surrounding communities were home to foundries, steel suppliers, machine shops, and a workforce that understood manufacturing. Freight lines ran in every direction. Raw materials came in easily, and finished product moved out fast. For a company that had been making railroad tools in a small town, the move to Harvey meant better and faster ways to move product in and out. It gave Buda the suppliers, the labor, and the shipping reach to stop thinking like a small rail supplier and start operating like a serious engine builder. Harvey gave Buda room to grow, and grow it did. By the early 1900s, the company had shifted its focus towards something more ambitious than foundry work. America was entering the age of the internal combustion engine, and Buda wanted to be part of it. The country was changing fast. Horses were giving way to machines. Farms needed mechanical power. Roads were filling with trucks. Railroads needed lighter, faster vehicles for inspection and maintenance work. Every one of those needs required an engine. Buda looked at that landscape and decided it was going to be an engine company. Not a truck company, not a tractor company, an engine company. That distinction mattered. It meant Buda's customers were everywhere, across every industry that needed power. And in the early 20th century, that was every industry there was. The timing could not have been better. Buda was stepping into the engine business just as America was moving into a new mechanical age. More industries were beginning to depend on internal combustion, and that meant the demand for dependable engines was about to explode. For a company willing to focus on power instead of finished machines, the opportunity was enormous. Buda was not tying itself to one product or one market. It was placing itself at the center of a broader industrial shift, one that would create customers in every direction. A company that could build reliable engines and deliver them at scale suddenly had room to grow almost everywhere. By 1907, Buda was building gasoline engines for railroad motor cars. These were not glamorous machines. They were the workhorses of the rail world. Small, rugged vehicles that carried inspectors down the line, moved crews between yards, and handled the unglamorous daily work that kept the railroads running. Buda built engines for these cars that became widely used across the industry. They were reliable, and they worked. That reputation for reliability was the foundation everything else was built on. But reputation does not build itself. It gets earned one application at a time, in real conditions, under real pressure. The railroad motorcar business gave Buda exactly that kind of proving ground. These engines did not sit in controlled environments. They ran in heat, in cold, on rough track, in remote locations where a breakdown meant real consequences. They were maintained by workers who needed them to start and run without drama. Every mile those engines covered without failing strengthened Buda's reputation. Word spread the way it always does in industries built on equipment, through the people who used it and the people who fixed it. Mechanics talked, purchasing managers compared notes. Fleet operators asked what other operators were running. Buda's name kept coming up as the answer. That kind of reputation is slow to build and almost impossible to fake. By the time Buda started expanding into trucks and agricultural equipment, it was not introducing itself to a skeptical market. It was walking into rooms where people already knew what it could do. That made every new customer relationship easier to start and harder for a competitor to break. By then, Buda was no longer proving it could build engines. It was proving how many places those engines could go. Railroads needed them. Truck builders needed them. Fire apparatus makers and farmers needed them. The more industries mechanized, the more valuable Buda's position became. It was not tied to one machine or one market, which meant every new sector that adopted engine power created another lane for the company to grow. From there, Buda expanded into trucks. When Kenworth began building trucks in the early 1920s, its early models commonly used four-cylinder Buda engines. That relationship lasted into the 30s, when Kenworth was offering Buda six-cylinder gasoline engines as well. Kenworth would go on to become one of the most respected names in American trucking. In those early years, Buda was the engine behind it. Fire apparatus builders came next. Seagrave fire apparatus used Buda engines. American LaFrance used them too. These were the fire trucks protecting American cities, and Buda was under the hood. In agriculture, their engines were used in tractors from brands such as Oliver, and in other farm machines as well. The Oliver 80, one of the most recognizable row crop tractors of its generation, was offered with a Buda diesel option. Fewer than 150 of these diesel units were ever produced, making them incredibly rare today. But their existence proved that major tractor manufacturers trusted Buda enough to power their flagship machines. That reach across so many different industries was not an accident. It was the direct result of a business model that most companies never attempt. Buda did not need to own the whole machine. It only needed to own the part that made the machine useful. A tractor without a dependable engine is an expensive piece of iron sitting in a field. A freight truck without an engine that holds up over long miles is a liability, not an asset. Buda understood that the engine was the one component no manufacturer could afford to get wrong, and it built its entire identity around being the company that got it right. That meant its customers were spread across industries that had almost nothing else in common. A fire apparatus builder and a tractor manufacturer and a railroad operator were not competing with each other. They were all just looking for the same thing, an engine they could trust. Buda could serve all of them at once, which meant its fortunes were never tied to the health of any single market. When one industry slowed, another was often growing. That kind of diversification was not just smart business. It was structural protection that most of Buda's competitors never had. At the height of World War I production in 1917, the Harvey plant had around 2,400 workers, with about 1,500 working directly on engines. By 1922, the plant still employed roughly 1,900 men. By the mid-20s, Buda was producing a wide range of engine types in multiple sizes, serving customers across trucking, agriculture, fire apparatus, marine, and industrial work. At its peak, Buda was not just a supplier, it was the engine underneath a significant share of American commercial life. By that point, Buda had already proven it could supply power to a country that was mechanizing fast. But the industry was not standing still, and neither was the engine itself. Gasoline power had helped build Buda's name, yet heavier trucks, harder industrial work, and longer operating hours were pushing the market toward diesel. Diesel engines offered stronger low-end pulling power, better fuel economy, and the kind of durability that mattered when machines were expected to work all day under load. Buda could see that shift coming. The company had spent decades building its reputation on dependable power, and now the next test was whether it could carry that reputation into the diesel age before larger competitors locked up the future. And they were not standing still. In the 30s, the company licensed a diesel combustion technology from the Lanova Corporation and began building what became known as the Buda-Lanova diesel engine. The Lanova system used an indirect injection divided combustion chamber with a small energy cell where fuel ignited to create a high-pressure blast, forcing a controlled double swirl of turbulence back into the main cylinder for a smoother, quieter burn than any other diesel of its day. The result was an engine that delivered remarkably refined and reliable power in the industrial and commercial work Buda was already serving. It was a deliberate move into a technology that was reshaping the industry. Buda saw where things were going and adapted. For a moment, the war years made it look as if Buda had secured its place for good. During World War II, the company supplied engines for military locomotives used by the U.S. Army, built to demanding specifications and tested before they left the plant. Buda also produced large engines for heavy-duty locomotive applications. The company earned the Army-Navy E Award for Excellence, a prestigious honor they would go on to win 5 times during the conflict, a feat achieved by very few American plants. But wartime demand had masked something important. It had made Buda look bigger than ever, but it also hid how vulnerable the company had become. Once the war ended, the market stopped rewarding simply being reliable and started rewarding whoever could move fastest, scale widest, and fund the next generation of engine development. That was the kind of fight independent builders almost never won. The conditions that had allowed Buda to thrive, a fragmented market, loyal customers, and limited competition, were about to change permanently. The post-war world was going to be a different kind of fight. Detroit Diesel had introduced its 671 engine in 1938, and by the post-war years, it was becoming the dominant force in commercial diesel applications. The 671 engine was a 2-stroke engine, simple to maintain, durable, and backed by the resources of General Motors. Cummins was building its reputation in long-haul trucking, with engines that offered strong fuel economy and reliability over hundreds of thousands of miles. Caterpillar was moving into diesel with the weight of a company that had been building heavy equipment for decades. Buda was competing against all of them as an independent company with a single plant in Harvey, Illinois. The imbalance was impossible to miss. Detroit Diesel had General Motors behind it. Cummins had deep relationships with the major truck manufacturers. Caterpillar had a distribution network that stretched across the country. Buda had its reputation, its engineering, and its loyal customer base. For a while, that was enough. But the market was consolidating fast, and the companies that survived consolidation were the ones with the deepest pockets and the broadest reach. The era of the standalone engine company was ending, and there was nothing any of them could do to stop it. The companies pulling ahead were winning because they had resources that Buda could not match, not because they had better engineers. Detroit Diesel could fund years of development on a new engine platform and absorb the losses while it waited for the market to catch up. Cummins could build deeper relationships with major truck manufacturers and strengthen its hold on key customer segments. Caterpillar could build dealer networks across the country that put trained technicians and spare parts within reach of almost any operator. These were not engineering advantages, they were structural ones, and they compounded over time. Every year a larger company spent building its distribution network was another year Buda fell further behind in reach. Every new engine platform a well-funded competitor developed was another product Buda could not match without capital it did not have. The gap was not dramatic at first. It widened slowly, the way these things always do, until one day the distance was too large to close. Buda had not changed. The industry had changed around it, and the company that had once been perfectly positioned was now standing in the wrong place. For Buda, that was the trap. Its engineers still knew how to build a reliable engine. Its customers still trusted the product. But the strengths that had carried Buda through the first half of the century were strengths built for an earlier market. There was also a technical problem building quietly underneath Buda's diesel business. The Lenova system was an indirect injection design that worked well at moderate speeds, but it was eventually outclassed by newer direct injection designs that offered better thermal efficiency, more power per unit of fuel, and a simpler engine overall. The very thing that had made Buda's diesels distinctive was becoming a liability. Adapting required investment, and investment required resources that an independent engine company of Buda's size was increasingly hard-pressed to generate. Every year that passed without a modern direct injection platform was another year that the more efficient, high-output designs from Cummins and Detroit Diesel pulled further ahead. Then came the decision that ended Buda as an independent company. In 1953, Allis-Chalmers acquired Buda to secure a diesel engine supply of its own. But what was a strategic solution for Allis-Chalmers was the point of no return for Buda. 70 years of independent identity, of building engines under its own name for its own customers, ended with that transaction. Buda did not choose this outcome. It arrived because the company had been squeezed from every direction. By competition it couldn't match at scale, by technology it couldn't afford to replace fast enough, and by a market that had reorganized itself around companies far larger than Buda had ever been. The acquisition was not a rescue. It was an absorption. For Buda, the acquisition meant the end of independence. Almost immediately, Allis-Chalmers rebranded the engines under its own label, systematically stripping away a name that had taken 70 years to build. The distinctive Lenova combustion system was phased out in favor of direct injection. And while the redesign was arguably the right engineering decision, the identity that made Buda what it was absorbed and overwritten. The Harvey facility simply became the Allis-Chalmers diesel engine plant. Buda's disappearance wasn't a collapse. It was purely administrative, an industrial empire folded into a new corporate identity almost overnight. Before long, Allis-Chalmers began to unravel too. Through the 70s and 80s, the company was hit by the farm crisis, rising competition from John Deere and International Harvester, and mounting financial losses. It shut down tractor production in 1980. By 1987, it had filed for bankruptcy. The agricultural business was sold off. The construction business was sold off. The Harvey plant passed through a succession of owners until the assembly lines finally went silent, and the Buda name, already faded, vanished into the background of industrial history.